So in this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about problems with reciprocity, particularly problems with reciprocity as grounding political obligations or authority. There are four, I think, distinct problems with the view that reciprocity confers authority, right? The view that Socrates, in part, articulates in the Crito, where he says that he is obligated to Athens because Athens conferred so many benefits upon him throughout his long life. And there's four distinct problems. One, particularly in democracies, it seems that lawmakers are doing what they're told. A second problem is that the benefits that you receive, that is to say, in order to count as favors, benefits must be wanted and not forced upon the recipient. A third problem is that politicians can sometimes speculate in reciprocity, leaving us thinking that we perhaps do not owe them anything in return. And finally, reciprocity, even the structure of the concept of reciprocity, seems to imply non-enforceability. That is to say that even if obligations were generated, these are not the sorts of obligations that can be enforced. Let's go to the first problem. Lawmakers are doing what they're told. Now, it seems to be obligated to government. It has to be the case that the government is doing favors for you that they were not required to do. Yet, think about it. On a democratic account of government, lawmakers are doing what the majority tells them to do. In fact, they're obligated to at least govern in the public's interest, if not directly according to the wishes of the public. This means that they are doing things for the public, that in doing things for the public, they are fulfilling an obligation, not doing favors. Moreover, the benefits provided by government are bought and paid for by tax revenue. When someone gives you the thing you asked for and have paid for, they're not doing you a favor. And because they're not doing you a favor, it's not clear that you owe them any extra obligation once you have paid for government. So reciprocity seems to provide an okay account of why you should pay your taxes, but it doesn't necessarily seem to provide you an account for why you should obey the law always. Now, it's certainly possible to think that some government officials do go above and beyond what they are required to do as part of their job. But why should we think that the public is obligated to the government as a whole rather than to these specific benefactors? So there might be some government officials to whom you owe obligations of reciprocity, but it's not clear why you would owe the government as a whole obligations of reciprocity when all they're doing is either their duty, all they're doing is their duty and what you pay them to do. A second problem is that a genuine favor seems to be a benefit that the beneficiary actually wants. It's not always clear that all people want all the benefits governments claim to provide, and that's going to be true even if the people receiving the benefits who don't want them recognize that these benefits are net benefits, even after taxes. That is to say that they're worth paying for, but just because something's worth paying for doesn't mean that you are obligated to pay for it. So, for instance, there might be a TV that you have your eye on that you think is worth the money, but that doesn't mean that the seller of that TV can just dump the TV in your living room and then send you a bill. It seems to be that even though you think it's worth it, your consent may still be required. So, a genuine favor seems to be a benefit that, if possible, is also not forced upon the recipient. Right? So I think that's not always true, right? There can be real favors that can't be refused. So for instance, if you are unconscious and somebody saves your life, I think it's certainly possible to say they've done you a favor, in part because you would have agreed to it. You would have agreed to it if you could have, but you were unconscious, so you couldn't. So there's going to be cases where someone does you a real favor even though you didn't have the opportunity to refuse. But most of the time, if someone forces a benefit upon you, and this is regardless of whether you actually wanted the benefit, you do not have any obligation to them, especially if your consent could have been secured. So, for example, if someone keeps mailing you presents, right, and you don't know who it is, and then one day they show up and start asking you to return the favor, it's not clear that this constant stream of benefits that you've received is anything that you owe obligation in return for because you didn't want them, right? You didn't want the favor. Now, when we think about the obligations to government, many government benefits think of, for instance, national security, can't be refused, and many other government benefits can only be refused with great difficulty. Think about the use of roads, for example, or the use of airports. So it's possible to refuse these benefits, but it's very, very hard in practice to do so and very costly to do so. So if the government is providing you with benefits that you literally can't refuse, it's not clear that they're doing you a favor. It seems that favors, at least in part of the structure of favor giving, is that if you have the opportunity to consent, they must give you the opportunity to refuse. Okay. So let's talk about the problem of non-enforceability. So, unlike some kinds of moral duties, reciprocity usually requires the responsible moral agent, that's the you, to make a decision once you receive the favor. Right? So when someone gives you a favor or does you a favor, you have to decide how best to reciprocate. You have to make a decision, in other words, how to return the favor. It doesn't seem to be in the structure of the concept of reciprocity. The person who does you a favor should be able to dictate how you pay them back, right? So if I let you borrow my car, I can request a favor from you later, but it's still up to you to decide whether you think my request is reasonable and how to fulfill that request. I can't just come and command you, or at least create a duty for you, to do whatever I tell you to do at the time of my choosing. The only way I can do that is if we made a contract, but if we made a contract, then it's no longer a case of reciprocity. So favors do create obligations, but it doesn't seem to be in the structure of reciprocity that it places you under anybody's command. And that seems to be a mark against reciprocity. Furthermore, even if it were to put you under somebody's command, it's not clear that reciprocity, again, the concept of reciprocity, entails that such obligations be enforceable. In fact, it seems to imply quite the opposite, that obligations should be unenforceable. Because it seems that if... let me rephrase this. What's the point of contracts if doing favors creates enforceable obligations, right? It seems that the point of contracts is to make enforceable certain kinds of reciprocal obligations, right? Contracts specify, I will do this for you at this time, and you will do this for me at that time. That's the structure of a contract, and contracts are what authorize you to rely on other people for specific actions. That is to say, when you want to bring enforceability into the picture, you draw up a contract, you draw up or at least a verbal agreement. The implication being that if you don't enter a contract, you haven't licensed anyone to rely on you. Contracts are what give you an enforceable obligation. Reciprocity merely stipulates that you owe somebody a favor at some point in time, right? And that has a certain size and a certain duration. But reciprocity seems to be a much less well-defined concept than contracts, and as a result, when you need somebody to perform and when you need people to rely on one another, you want to put a contract in place. Relying on reciprocity seems to leave a lot of details unanswered. Finally, I think the last problem we were supposed to go over was the problem of speculating in reciprocity. Now, Schmitz calls speculators in reciprocity people who do favors or who give out favors precisely in order to get you obligated to them. Now, the action may be genuinely beneficial to you, but the motivations behind the action may be tainted by a desire to control or manipulate a person at a later date. A classic example might be the mafia don, right? So if Don Corleone does you a favor, it seems to be with the implicit threat behind it that you now have to do something for Don Corleone, and something that might not be entirely legal. And so when Don Corleone doles out favors, it seems that Don Corleone is trying to get you obligated, is trying to make you put you under his power, or at least under his thumb. And so when people speculate in reciprocity, Schmitz thinks that it's different from ordinary favor giving. Speculating in reciprocity doesn't obligate as much because, in effect, it's not really a favor. It's a strategic and calculating act. And we saw earlier on, when we talked about the structure of reciprocity, is that if the motivations behind someone giving you a benefit were too selfish, it no longer really counts as a favor. They're just helping themselves, and so we don't think that we owe anybody anything for them helping themselves, even though it turned out to benefit you as well. Moreover, societies don't seem to really operate better when people only do good things for each other for strategic reasons, and for that reason it seems that speculating in reciprocity doesn't have the same value in supporting good institutions. We don't recognize the value of speculating in reciprocity as much because it doesn't contribute as much to the kinds of societies that we want to live in. So, for Schmitz, people who speculate are people who assume the risks of their speculation. Just like in the market, speculators in the stock market are people who assume the risks of speculating in the stock market. And so, for us here, the interesting question is whether the benefits we receive from governments actually obligate us to it. And if within government we see agents who, for their own ends, for their own selfish ends, want to keep citizens docile and obedient, or perhaps want to keep a pool of well-disposed voters towards them, then the favors that those people provide don't seem like they should obligate you, even if under other circumstances they might, because those people are trying to get you obligated. They're trying to buy your vote. They are trying to keep you quiet, keep you obedient, and so on and so forth. That is the real motivation lying behind the benefits that they convey upon you. And so these benefits are in effect not favors. So if you think a lot of agents within government are like that, then you should be more resistant to the idea that your duties towards government, whatever they may be, are grounded in a strong notion of reciprocity. So in conclusion, it's completely intuitive to most people that individuals should return favors. But genuine favors are benefits received that the benefactor did not have to provide. They're benefits that the recipient actually wants and not forced upon them. And that really calls into question whether, at the end of the day, our best account of our political obligations can be grounded in an idea of reciprocity.